Is America's credit system designed to keep people in poverty? Should we grade presidents on a curve? Is it altruistic to pay taxes? We'll talk about all of this and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of the Good Take, Bad Take podcast. This is the podcast where we scrounge throughout all the internet, find a bunch of different takes on politics and culture and other things. We highlight the good ones, reinforce why they're good. We also take a shot at the bad ones and try and point out why they're doing bad and try to have a little bit of fun along the way. My name's Britt, and I'm here with my co-host, Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you're watching on YouTube, we've got our social media handles right here. You can follow us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod and on Twitter at Good Bad Take Pod. The other one was taking a little bit too long. Now, without further ado, let's get into our first take that we're going to take on. So we've got Nina Turner. We've had her a lot. It takes from her a lot as of late. And she tweeted out, America's credit system is designed to keep people in poverty. What do you think, Donnie?
Well, it's an interesting one because on the one hand, in the way that she means it, I'm not sure that I agree. Like the basic idea of credit is not inherently predatory, right? At its best, the credit system is something where you can say, look, I have this idea or I have this need. Again, you know, thinking about it in the best positive, it's sort of either a way to tide over for an immediate need or a future investment, right? So the idea of on credit, can I get these resources in order to build something bigger and better? And then you will get more from that. That's sort of the investment side of credit. And then on the need side, you can also make the argument why a credit system is good because of the idea that, you know, I have this immediate need. Like maybe I just lost my job or I got injured and can't work for the next month or two. So I need some credit to tide me over. And then by the end of it, I will pay you with interest. And by that time, I will be able to work again. And, you know, my immediate need now has to be met by resources I don't currently have, but I will promise to get in the future. And obviously, money now is more important than money later, so I'll pay you back with interest. So in the very basic sense, the American credit system, when you look at it through that lens, it's not designed to keep people in poverty. However, the way that it actually ends up manifesting itself in many ways does tend to be predatory, and that sort of system is fueled by a monetary system, broadly speaking, that all it does is run credit and keep extending credit beyond what we have means for. And so in a sense, everyone is designed to be kept in poverty by an ever-expanding inflation rate with money for credit that just isn't backed up by any actual investment. So I'm kind of tempted to say it's a good take.
Yeah.
I don't, it's really difficult to get there to say Nina Turner has a good take, but I think it's accidentally based.
Yeah, I was planning on just taking the opposite of whatever you said because like, I do think it could go either way, but then you had to be awesome and provide such a balanced analysis of it that there's not really any opposite to take. I totally agree with you in that, like, it could be taken both ways. I think that, like, when you think about the Mises Institute kind of differentiates this as like true credit versus false credit, and true credit would be like what we traditionally know as like the credit score. It's, if you kind of even boil it down even simpler, it's banks when you go and say, hey, I want to have a loan, like I want $100,000 to open a bakery. Them looking at you saying, do you have any past experience baking things? Do you have any experience, running any business? Do you even know, what temperature to make cupcakes at or whatever? They're figuring out the risks of lending you money. When you extrapolate that over like millions of people, that's the credit score, right? Like it's a fast, easy, quick, awesome way to track everyone's responsibility with being loaned money and fulfilling their obligations to contracts. So, I have a lot of friends that will get upset, because they, I'm not a huge fan of Dave Ramsey in some ways, at least, and they adhere to his, we'll never have a credit card. It's like, well, unfortunately, people that are going to lend you money are going to want to know whether you're good at fulfilling your contracts. And one of the best ways to do that is through the credit score system. So if you can't get an apartment, or you have to go to an apartment that doesn't do a credit check, like that sucks, but it's what it is, and you're going to pay more. So yeah, a lot of people kind of bag on the credit system because of that, but it's like, well, that's actually just a way of people measuring whether you're honest, whether you're good at keeping your word. The other side of it, the false credit side, which I think is, I don't sure if Nina Turner's talking about it, but it could be perceived that way because she says America's.
Right.
Right. So when she says America's credit system, credit or loans at what banks are supposed to do is they're supposed to take money that savers have saved and give it to borrowers who want to like kind of borrow against their future and try and make something happen and produce more than what they are initially borrowing. And so there's like supposed to be an equilibrium of like, well, if all of the savers' money has been lent out, right, at a rate that the bank is comfortable with, and there's none left, then people can't borrow anymore, right? And then interest rates are going to compensate based on that because banks are going to push up interest rates to incentivize more people to save money so they can have more money to lend out and rinse repeat. The problem is America's credit system is false credit in that the Federal Reserve now prints money. And so when you get a mortgage for a house, even with your credit card, if you go and spend money on your credit card, it's not like they actually have savers money in hand that they now transfer to whoever you bought something from or bought for the house. They literally just hit zero or a couple, one followed by a couple zeros on their keyboard, hit enter, and then the money magically appears. It's just digital. It never actually entered their bank. And then you get into things like fractional reserve banking, which is like the bank only has to have 10%, right, of the money that they lend out on hand at any given time. And so other banks borrow from them. And so then you have massively more money in the monetary system, fake money, false credit in the monetary system than actually exists. And that drives people to be consumers. It drives people to spend money that they don't have and money that other people don't have. And so that is designed to keep you in poverty because then you're not buying assets, you're buying liabilities. And it's really bad. So, I think Nina Turner and a lot of socialists, a lot of people like this correctly diagnose that there is a problem, right? Like there are people being kept in poverty, but they're really bad at diagnosing why that is and what the cause of that is.
Yeah, I agree. I think about when you're talking about Dave Ramsey and the saving, the very frustrating thing is if you're not thinking about it as a demonstrable way to prove trustworthiness, right? Then I understand why people think it's so backwards, because in a sense, it is kind of backwards that in order to prove that you are responsible and don't overspend, you have to have this tool, which is commonly associated with overspending and gives you the means to overspend. And so even as you have people trying to be responsible, they're somewhat punished in the system for being responsible. But on the other hand, even if you want to take this from, I don't know, is Dave Ramsey, I feel like he's religious. I know that a lot of, I know that a lot of, he goes to a lot of churches and stuff. So I think, but if you're thinking about it, even from a Christian lens, there is the verse. I know it's not talking about specifically money and investing, but there is the verse where, Jesus rewards people for not just sitting on the money. He gives the parable of the people who go out and invest the money, the talents. Exactly. It comes back to them threefold, and he rewards them greatly. So obviously that's not financial advice, but there is wisdom to that in the financial arena, which is to say, even with things that money, you're not supposed to make your life obsessed about money, but you are supposed to live in a way that is realistic, and money is another resource in this world, and we're not just supposed to hide away in a cave, and part of that is money. So I think that sometimes people need to realize that the credit system and this path to being able to track whether or not you pay your debts back, these are good things because they allow the expansion, they allow exponential growth, which is not something to be shy of or scared of. I think becoming obsessed with that growth and becoming obsessed with money as the means of life and the value that you chase after exclusively, that is something to be afraid of. But that's true of almost any facet of life that isn't, spiritually fulfilling. So I think that a lot of times Christians in particular are wary and follow that Dave Ramsey rule because you can get tempted to go down a bad path. But I think you also, on the other hand, need to remember that multiplying your resources to be used for the good is a good thing, right? Yeah. And should be sought after and is noble, in fact, to expand your wealth if you're going to use it for virtuous ends.
Yeah, and I think this is a great example of, again, how socialists will diagnose a problem. Maybe it's even redistribution of wealth in a lot of ways, right? Like they're saying, well, no one needs $1 billion or whatever. And it's like, maybe you're right about that, but the answer is not to forcefully, under duress and coercion, take that money from them. That's obviously wrong. But I kind of agree with you that no one necessarily needs $1 billion to live and exist. And maybe it would be virtuous of them to figure out how to spread that money around in some way. Well, how do you voluntarily get them to do that? It's like, oh, well, it's through investment of capital into things that are going to have a return, right? No one wants to go put their money in a pile out in the back of the yard and light it on fire. Everyone, if you're going to loan someone something, you're going to be like, well, why do you got a bunch of matches and gasoline, right? Like that's going to tip your risk reward analysis of whether you're going to lend them money or not. And so this is like a voluntary, ethical, awesome way for money to be redistributed in a way that everyone wins, right? No one has to be coerced to do anything. And if people just kind of got that, it's like, oh yeah, like credit and the ability for someone to say like, hey, I worked really hard in my life. I've saved up more than I can actually use. And I want to give that to someone that might have a skill that I don't have in an industry that I'm not familiar with, but they have a really great idea. Like it's a great way for them to get involved in that and to spur on more and continued growth, which in the end makes all of us better off.
Totally agreed.
All right, moving on to our next one. We kind of got a pretty long discourse between Scott Adams, Spike Cohen, and Justin Amash. And we're doing the last two tweets on this. So Scott Adams replied to a tweet. He said, say what you will about Trump, but he showed up every day for work without pay. Congress did the opposite by passing an omnibus bill they didn't read. That's not doing a good job or a bad job. That's not showing up to work. Why do we pay them? And then Spike Cohen replied, Trump signed several omnibus bills and ran up $7 trillion in debt in one term, a new record. Biden is likely to beat him, but let's not pretend Trump wasn't terrible on this too. Then Scott replied, Congress hogties the president no matter who it is. It was the least awful choice by the time it got to his desk. All presidents get pushed into the same box by Congress not doing his job. I don't rank them on this dimension. None beat the trap. And then Justin Amash replied to all of this. You should rank them on this dimension, though. A president can shape what gets to their desk by making clear from day one what kind of bill will be vetoed. For example, he could declare in his inauguration that he will unconditionally veto any bill Congress passes without reading. And Spike Cohen followed up with that and then said, and then actually follow through on doing that, on vetoing bills that haven't been read. So we're critiquing the Justin Amash and Spike Cohen argument that you should evaluate presidents on whether or not they actually get the things they say they want to get done. Good take, bad take. What do you think, Donnie?
Well, I think it's a good take. Overall, these are good takes. I do think that there is a level of, I wouldn't even say naivete, but maybe wishful thinking that this kind of thing would happen. But I think when they're speaking about this in the abstract with principles, I think they are correct, right? They're not saying this is going to happen. They're not saying this would fix everything, but they are saying if you're going to praise Trump in these ways, here are very tangible, real things that he could have done that would make make him more sympathetic, right? If Trump had done those things, it would have been a lot more. I would be a lot more willing to say, well, Trump really was hogtied by Congress. The system is so corrupt and bad that even though Trump wanted to do more, he couldn't. Yeah. But I think Spike and Justin demonstrate how, even though all of his rhetoric was, I'm going to do all these things, I'm going to cut, I'm going to be the most business-like leader, and oh, it's the swamp that's stopping me, he himself had so many ways that he could have defied, or at least signaled that he was going to defy the swamp and didn't do those things. So I think that these are good takes, even if I don't agree. I'm not even disagreeing with them. I just don't think this would have fixed the problem ultimately, or gotten any real change necessarily. The end result might be similar, but I think if you're evaluating Trump's character and his performance as president, then he would have needed to do the things that they list in order for me to say, yeah, it really was the system. It wasn't him being part of the system. As it stands here, I think for these reasons, it's very clear that Trump was just one of a number of politicians who's just going to fall in line at the end of the day. Yeah. Not a real groundbreaker like he kind of positioned himself as.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you that these are good takes from Justin and Spike. Trump's whole shtick was that, oh, I'm going to drain the swamp. I'm the outsider. Hillary Clinton, be glad I'm not as a president, because if I was, you'd be in jail. And then, I absolutely loved it when he destroyed Jeb Bush, in the debates and everything. So people fell in love with him because of that, right? Like, he kind of positioned himself as like, hey, all the policies, all of the mealy mouth words and lack of follow through and getting us into wars and, printing a bunch of money and doing all this stuff. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm outside of, I'm going to drain the swamp finally. And then he gets into office and he hires John Bolton and he hires all these establishment folks. And then he signs the $7 trillion bill, $7 trillion bill, signs, all these different crazy things, is the one that developed the vaccine, shut down the country. So it's like, yeah, you kind of, what is it? It's the Tom Woods quote that no matter who you vote for, you always get John McCain as for president. And to be fair, right, to give some credit where credit's due, Donald Trump is the first president in a long time that has not gotten us into any new foreign wars. He still did some crazy things that weren't good. And so on that measure, it's like, it's okay. But that's like, I don't even think that hits like the bare minimum of like passing grade, right? For that. Yeah. There's all these other things, that should have happened. And I think that like, people need to be careful. Like, Scott Adams needs to be careful. And this is the Dilbert guy. I think you were telling me that last week. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Love that comic, actually. But Scott Adams needs to be careful that, like, hey, just because you like someone's personality and all this stuff, and like, you need to be careful that you don't have this weird Stockholm syndrome to make excuses for them once they're in. Just because you supported them and you thought they were great and you backed them and then they get in and they're terrible, it doesn't mean that you have to continue supporting them after they're in there. Like, it's okay to be like, nope, I supported him because he said he would do this, this, and that he would drain the swamp, and he hasn't done that, so I no longer support him. That's the actual principled stance to take. And I think Justin's right when he says, like, you should evaluate him on the dimension that got him into presidency in the first place, that made you want to support him in the first place, because the only way for someone to actually come in and do those things is if you like hold them accountable. If you don't hold them accountable, I mean, that's why you get people like George W. Bush and Barack Obama all talking a really good game foreign, diplomacy wise. And then they do the exact opposite of what they say once they're in there. Hope you're muted.
So I am. The only other thing I would add to that is when it comes to it, it's not even that Trump signed the bills that he didn't, I don't know, he didn't veto these things. I mean, he actively wanted to pass these major spending bills. Yeah. And that's something that I think that Spike and Justin don't even, and I wouldn't even say that there's necessarily room for it in this interaction. They don't even hit him that hard on, when Spike says Trump signed several omnibus bills and ran up $7 trillion, Scott says Congress hogties the president no matter who it is. But let's not forget, it wasn't hogtying. Donald Trump actively wanted to spend that money. He wanted the Trump bucks. He wanted the vaccine rollout. He bragged about shutting down the country. He said that the governors who opened up were being fools and idiots for defying him. So all of these things where it's like, well, Congress, really, it's like, yeah, Congress does hogtie to some degree, but Trump actively pushed for these things. It's not even like he resentfully said, well, under duress, I'm going to sign this. No, he was like, I want to spend money on these things, and oh man, the Democrats are adding, but I want to spend on these things. So you can't be acting like a martyr and oh man, it's so unfortunate that Democrats want to spend in these ways because I want to spend in these ways. If you want to spend, you're part of the problem. Yeah. That's why every I feel like everyone who's serious about that would actually propose a bill that cuts as much as they want to spend, right? If they're proposing, I need to spend, I really think spending on X, Y, or Z is important. If you're actually principled and you, for some reason, think that these spending metrics for whatever additions you're making are necessary, then you find where to cut elsewhere. And better yet, you just find cuts to begin with to lower the spending altogether. But if you're going to introduce new things and you really are this reformer and you don't want to spend new money, then you find the cuts for whatever you think is more important. Because realistically, you have to recognize that everything has an opportunity cost. So if you're paying for a new program, that means that you now don't have resources for something else. If in fact you recognize that government spending is finite and it's not just this infinite well of free money you can print. Of course, Trump has no no basis for that kind of thinking. He has no philosophical root in monetary theory that would allow him to see that.
It would have been awesome though if he had.
Yeah, it would have been.
All right, moving on to our next one. I saw this quote tweeted out by Phil Labonte from All That Remains, the band, and I thought it was good. We're critiquing someone from over 100 years ago, but it's a Friedrich Nietzsche quote, and it writes: "Socialism itself can hope to exist only for brief periods here and there, and then only through the exercise of extremist terrorism. For this reason, it is secretly preparing itself for rule through fear, and is driving the word, quote, justice into the heads of the half-educated masses like a nail so as to rob them of their reason, and to create in them a good conscience for the evil game they are to play." What do you think?
It's funny because the moment you see the name Nietzsche, I'm like, oh, I'm going to hate this. And then I read it and I'm like, well, he's not wrong, I don't think, in many ways. That it's a lot to digest.
Yeah.
But I think that the key issues of the preparing itself for rule through fear, and then the emphasis on justice, driving the word justice into the heads, that I think is scary how accurate
I know
have come to fruition here, right? And it's not even in the same beat, but these two themes have sort of independently arisen from each other. You obviously have the big social justice movement, and then you have the fear in all kinds of ways, fear, right, of Russia, fear of Iran, fear of COVID, whatever issue you want to make. And so you have these two prevailing notions that are being championed by the same lefty progressive socialist side, and you're kind of taken aback, like, dang, this guy's right on the money.
I mean, let's see, when was this book written? I haven't read this book. Human, All Too Human is the name of the book. It's just, I mean, 1878, man. He wrote this in 1878, and even the words he uses are the words being used today, like justice, social justice warriors, and all those different things. Nietzsche, like, I mean, obviously, for you and I, like, growing up Christian and all this stuff, like, very much, like, don't like him, in a lot of ways, or he's kind of like demonized, but that doesn't discount the fact that he did a lot of really fantastic insight into human nature. And that's what I really like about this excerpt from the book, is that, like, he correctly diagnoses that, like, humans, even though we, in the Enlightenment period, we kind of think like, oh, like, we're going to only adhere to rationalism and we're going to make our own morals and all this stuff. And he's like, that's actually going to leave us off really bad, like, if we do that, because without any anchor to what gives us morals, or to what is the supreme sovereign in our lives, like, we are left to our own devices, and there won't be enough water to wash all the blood away. And he correctly predicted, the rise of communism and all this stuff. And it's like, this is just this part of his argument just follows, right? Like, in order for the general masses to be comfortable with throwing Jews in the concentration camps, or, throwing folks in the gulag, or reporting on their neighbor to be arrested and tortured, you have to convince them that they are doing a good thing, and that it's right, and that there is justice in the world and equilibrium that needs to be had. And the only way to do that is to take from those who have, and maybe they got it ill-gotten, through ill-gotten means, but take from them and make it even, right? And he correctly predicted that, and that's why I think this is a really awesome take.
Yeah, I think he had some key insights, even if his ultimate conclusion was wrong. I think he had some writings, and I could be mistaken about when he writes The Will to Power, and how that will ultimately drive people into meaninglessness, which he himself, of course, ended up going into. Unfortunately, the guy ended up killing himself, I believe. But when you have a materialist worldview, that is kind of the ultimate end to that, right? To realize that the only thing that matters is power, because nothing matters. And so I think that this is kind of a condemnation, in a sense, of the socialism, because I don't think he's like a cheerful nihilist, right? I don't think he's saying, oh, nothing matters and all that matters is power, and I'm happy for it.
No.
And I think he almost laments it. And I think that this socialist quote here is kind of a skeleton framework for that, right? Because socialism is, in many ways, that means to an end of power, even as it tries to even as it tries to preach an egalitarian message, it ultimately is just about control and the control of resources. Again, whether or not it's trying to be altruistic in its end or not, all it is a matter of control, which is just another way of saying nihilism in a sense.
Man, I'm taking it. We haven't talked about it yet, but you haven't finished Andor.
I have not yet.
Brother, you gotta watch. You gotta finish that thing. Like,
okay, I will.
Yeah, there's a whole speech on control, which is just dope. It's a great one. But on this, I mean, on back to the Nietzsche quote. You know, I think this is such a what is it? What is the word? There's so much finesse in how he breaks down like what socialism is, because he's able to convey that like socialism might right a wrong in some ways, but it rights a wrong by committing another wrong. And so they're with good conscience, right? Because you're seeing a wrong and you're like, well, I'm going to take the opposite of it. They're going to do an evil game. Like it's such a nuanced and awesome way of looking at the world that communicates so much. You know, you and I would boil it down to, well, taxation is theft and socialism is redistribution of wealth and taking from one person through, you know, threat of coercion. You know, he says it so elegantly here that it really drives home the emotional point as well. And I think it was either Tolkien or it was C.S. Lewis that wrote about, like, you know, we need to be fearful of the people that are tyrants that have a good conscience, because they will torture us forever without any sort of, you know, ping in their conscience that they're doing something wrong. I totally butchered the quote, but that's essentially what they're saying. Yeah.
C.S. Lewis, and the most dangerous person being the tyrant who thinks he's doing it for your own good.
Yes. Yeah, because they will oppress you without ceasing or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fantastic quote. You know, and Nietzsche was just about 60 years early to that point before them. So
yeah,
I'll have to read that book. I've never read it. I have Beyond Good and Evil. I keep trying to finish it, man. It's so hard. Like I've got, I think the farthest I've gotten is halfway. And then I put it away for a bit and I never come back. And so
it's not exactly a casual pickup and read.
Oh, it's hard. It's a hard one to read. All right. Next take. So this is a quote retweet. The first person tweeted, "To all of you reaping the benefits of my hard work to give you $10 a day daycare, I ask you, where is your sense of pride? Why would you be okay with taking my hard-earned money to pay for your obligations to your kids? Serious question." And then someone quote retweeted it, replying, "My tax dollars pay for roads I'll never drive on, national parks I'll never visit, and schools my children will never attend. We call this, quote, living in a society, unquote. In exchange, we get safety and community, and we don't have to bang rocks together to make fire. It's pretty great." What do you think, Donnie? Do we live in a society?
We get another episode with that title. It's funny because this person conflates voluntary exchange and community with mandatory redistribution of wealth. The mandatory redistribution of wealth, so that someone else is taking my money by force for something that I'm not paying or investing in, that is not the same as a voluntary cooperation. A lot of the times, people who like to make this type of claim will posit examples of, well, you know, I don't directly oversee the defense of the village if you're in a small community, so why should I pay for the fence? And then the neighboring village comes over and runs you down because you didn't have a fence. But the problem with so many examples that people give of those kinds of things, like, for instance, we have an educated society or whatever, they talk about these things in broad strokes as though there's no nuance to the things that are being funded. So, for instance, when they talk about we'll get a safe community, well, if I'm paying for police who stand down during Black Lives Matter riots and let the businesses burn, we're not getting safe communities, and I'm still forced to pay that. So no, that's not a good example. Now, if I am living in a smaller community and I want some security, I would gladly pitch in to pay for that kind of thing. And when people voluntarily pool resources, then you do get things like safer communities and places where you don't have to bang rocks together to make fire, because people naturally want to specialize. And then when people are specializing, you get more productive, and then you can compound that, and et cetera. The problem is that's not, I mean, sometimes, you know, that will happen through force, through government taxes. That can happen, but it's not always incentivized, and there's no, you know, way to correct for that. So now we have not only, I mean, in the first example, he says, you know, $10 a day daycare, and where's your pride? I don't even think that's the strongest argument for it, because it's like, not only that, it's like my taxpayers going to subsidize some people's daycare. Okay, I don't love that necessarily, but what I take more issue with is my taxpayer dollars going to brainwash people's children in the public education system that government is good. My taxpayer dollars going to fund wars that we have no business being in. There's so many atrocious uses of my tax dollars that I have no say in. Whereas if I was in a community, a localized smaller community where we had a system of voluntary stewardship of that community, I would actually have a say. I would actually be able to say, no, I'm not going to pitch in for that. I'm not going to pay for that. We're not going to teach these things, or or I will not contribute my money to that end. So this person, I think, takes a very local principle where things work when people have a say, when people have options and voluntary back and forths, whether that's voluntary exchange or voluntary withholding of funds because they don't support an end. And then they extrapolate that to the forced massive government level, which I don't think is a fair comparison at all.
Yep. It's not fair. And I also take issue with like a lot of these people, when they hear us say things like, yeah, there should be no taxation, like do away with the federal education, do away with the parks department and all this stuff. And they're like, oh, that must mean you don't want, roads to be built. That means you don't want children to be educated or to go to school. It's like, no, that's not what we said. What we're saying is we would rather it be done privately because we believe that that's the best way to execute the end goal, which is educated children, preservation of land, all these things. I was just, I can't remember where I heard this. It was on some podcast, but basically it's like 90% of all endangered species are housed on private land, non-federal land. Because at the end of the day, ownership is the best way to determine whether or not that land is going to be taken care of and protected, and the rights of the animals that are on that are if someone wants to preserve the right of those animals, they're going to be protected. Like a private property is easier to defend from poachers, from people trying to hurt it, than public property where no one actually owns it, right? This is one of the reasons why the oceans, there's so much subject to overfishing, because no one can actually own a part of the ocean or anything like that. When you own something, it makes it so that you're incentivized to make sure that it's sustainable, continues going on, that is not destroyed, and that you can come back to it, day after day. So when this guy says, well, how we're going to be, he baked into his arguments that well, yeah, I'm paying for roads I'll never drive on. If you don't want to pay for those roads that you'll never drive on, that must mean that you don't want any roads that you will drive on. It's like, well, no, I will pay for the road that I want to drive on. There is no reason for me to pay for a road someplace else because I don't know anything. If I pay for it, I should have a say in how it's done. And if I don't live there, then why would I what gives me the right, or what even makes me the most informed person to make any calls about how a road should be built in Texas versus here in Washington? I should make a call on the roads that I'm going to be driving on and that I'm paying for. And so I don't like that he conflates that so much that if you don't like this, then obviously you want children to be poor, destitute, and work in factories. The other part that I don't like is that if we didn't have all this federal spending, that we'd still be in the Stone Age, as if that all, technological progress has been spurred on by the government. That's not true at all. All technological progress is the result of capital being invested into people who are smart, intellectuals, private engineers, private entrepreneurs that have great ideas. It is not because the government funded something. Sure, we got to space, with NASA, but now look at who is actually getting to space and getting to it in an actual more cost-effective way. It's private companies. They are funded a bit by the government, but point aside, private ownership conveys a sense of operation that you can't get when no one owns things. And that's what happens when the federal government owns something.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Sometimes people point to examples of things that were made or accomplished by government. And, I'm not so dogmatic as to say the government can never build anything, because it's well, if you give them resources that are extracted, sure, they can make something. The difference is, are they going to make it efficiently? Are they going to make it the best way possible? Do they have mechanisms to tell them when something is successful or not successful? Do they have incentives to fix problems when they arise, or do they not? To speak to all that, when you were talking about the private land ownership for the endangered animals, one interesting thing I actually just read in my coworker's book that I highly recommend, Time to Think Small.
Who's the coworker?
Todd Myers.
Todd Myers.
Yeah,
Time to Think Small by Todd
Time
Myers.
to Think Todd Myers. Yeah, and he's not even he's not even libertarian like I am, but he brings up a lot of good privatized stuff for the environment. But one of the things he talks about is how there are government programs where if an endangered species is detected on private land, the owners are now required by law to take care of them. And so what happens in certain, I don't remember if that's nationally or if it's in Washington, but what happens is that now landowners will be that, and that's a big cost to them in many cases because they can't plant. So before the habitation, when they start seeing the signs of a habitat that an endangered species would take, they destroy it. So, for instance, if a certain type of tree that an endangered species would naturally barricade itself in, that would become, if that starts to grow on their property, they uproot it. They get rid of it before the endangered species comes, because rather than being able to use their land, the federal government or whomever, I don't remember if it's federal or not, but they get to come in, take control, and lay all these costs on the people, whether they have a say or not. And so, they force this reality. And so then people, rather than wanting to preserve, they destroy the habitat before the species can even take place there. So to your point, private owners do want to take care of animals, but when there's a perverse incentive to not take care, then you actually end up destroying more habitat than you would otherwise would have. So the available habitats for that get destroyed because of that. And it's not the private owner's fault, because there aren't any endangered species there yet. But also to if you're worried about private owners destroying things, another great example he talks about is how the tribal wisdom of tree growth and how fires were a big part of forest rehabilitation for so long, and the tribes knew that, and so there was an appointed person who was the fireman, right? And they knew the wisdom of this was a very powerful tool. It needed to be used. But then the government came in and banned all fires. They said no fires at all, completely making the forests filled with dead trees. So then massive forest fires would come in and burn down everything because they weren't having healthy destruction in controlled amounts like the private voluntary actors do. So now, I can't remember what the percentage is, but I think it's a majority. If not, it's like a near majority percent of all like forest land is in the U.S. is privately owned and managed and maintained. And those forests suffer way less from things like wayward forest fires and stuff because they're being harvested. And so you have dead trees being cleared out. They do controlled burnings to keep them healthy and take care. And they're not subject to ridiculous political policies that go back and forth with whoever's elected. So all of those things go to contribute to saying that, society and civilization, all these incentives are best placed by people who are local and know them, not by people far away, not by people who are forced to pay for something they have no interest or no use for. So when this person acts like we would still be banging rocks together without government, this is actually no, with the government that we have, we've actually burned down forests. We've been banging rocks together and setting fires in forests with the government, not in a controlled manner that the individual private wisdom knew about.
Yeah, it's that reminds me of Joe Rogan had this guy named John Reeves on his podcast, and he's the largest landowner in Alaska, and he discovered this 5-acre parcel that he owns that's full like 10,000 mammoths or something like that, full of bones, which is incredible. But he was telling the story about how one of his buddies found a mammoth with still some like frozen tissue on it in one of the gold mines that he was working on. And he dug most of it out, and then he called some museum somewhere and said, "Hey, like I found this thing. I think I've got some Arctic creature here. Like, come out and get it." They said, "Okay." They came out, and then they said, "Hey, by the way, like we're shutting down your mine for a year." And so he was pretty angry about that. And then he became even more angry when he went to go see the actual specimen, and they charged him money to go see it. And then he also found out later that they had so many bones, they actually dumped a bunch in the river. Crazy podcast. Anyways, the next time he found a mammoth in one of his mines, he said, "Screw it, I'm not telling anyone about it." It still had live tissue on it. Pulled it out, and they actually cooked it up and ate some mammoth. It's a crazy story, man. But I mean, it's like, yeah, that's what's going to happen, right? Like you force this guy to be poor, right? Like instead of rewarding him for reporting what happened, and being like, hey, I want to share this discovery with the world, you penalized him, made him live off of beans for a year. The next time he finds it, I don't think he's going to come forward with it. I think he's going to use whatever he found for his own entertainment, up to including eating, 12,000-year-old meat.
Yeah. I hope it was delicious, though.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'll ever get a chance to try it because I don't think I'll ever gold mine. But I'll have to check out that book, though. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a good read. It's a good read.
All right, our last one is from Piper from Missouri. I don't actually know what she's running for. I think
she was running and then was defeated. Okay. So I don't think she's currently running.
So Piper previously for Missouri.
Yes.
She tweets out, I remember when conservatives were like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And now they are begging the government to give them vouchers so they don't have to pay for their kids' private school. Maybe they should make coffee at home and quit the avocado toast. All right, homeschool Donnie, what do you think?
This makes me so mad when I read it. I'm like, I almost went and found the tweet and responded, but I'm like, she's got enough people. She's not listening to anyone of reason. No. This is such a dumb take. Like, it's not even a bad take. I mean, it is a bad take, but it's just a dumb take. It's like the bully who robs your lunch money, and then you say, hey man, can I have it back? And he's like, wow, asking for handouts. Like, what are you talking about, you absolute moron? This person is claiming that people who want money to be their money that they're paying for to go to follow the student instead of being dumped into the public school system. They're like, hey, look, my student doesn't use the money that I'm paying for in the public school. If I'm going to be paying this money, can we at least make it follow my kid so that I'm not paying twice for this kid's education, once in the public school and once at this private school or charter school or whatever? It is wild and stupid that this person is saying that you're asking for a handout, or that you're abandoning the pull yourself up by the bootstraps and just make coffee at home, quit avocado. It is not equitable at all to say that. So, I hope that I can charge Piper, charge her bank account for my house mortgage, and then when she complains and say, hey, give me my money back, be like, wow, I thought you cared about integrity. I thought you wanted people to have homes. I thought that you didn't want to add to the homelessness shortage. Whatever it is, whatever kind of red herring straw man argument you want, it's just as dumb as what she's proposing here.
Yeah, she quite literally is like, hey, I'm going to take not only the bootstraps, but the boots on your feet from you. And then when you're saying like, oh, I can't get up without these, like, oh, like you don't actually believe in that principle then, it's like, well, you took the bootstraps and the boots from me. And these people, like, it's so transparent what interests they serve when it comes to this, because who benefits from the ability for parents to make the choice of where their kid will be best educated, right?
Yep.
It's like, oh, or not, or yeah. Who doesn't benefit or stands to lose from that choice?
Right.
And that is the teachers' unions, right? Because the teachers' unions fail every year. Ever since we federalized education and teacher unions came into being, federal education, even by their own standards, students are failing, and yet they get more and more money. I saw somewhere that it was like 300 spending on education has almost tripled since the 1970s, and that's adjusted for inflation, right? That's not like in real world dollars. It's tripled the amount of spending. Yet our ability to produce good students that actually know about things has increasingly diminished, and so. The people that are incentivized to like stop school choice are the ones that are worried that people will choose something other than their institution because they're doing such a bad job, right? Like I don't go to, if there's a pizza shop, there's 2 pizza shops on my street, and one of them like uses some weird dough and then doesn't even put tomato sauce on it and doesn't make anything that resembles pizza, but it's pizza in name only. And then there's a pizza shop down the street and I choose to go to that one. It's not like, oh, like I hate pizza, right? Like I hate small business. It's like, well, no, you make sucky pizza. I'm not going to go eat at your place. I'm not going to eat at your shop. It sucks. I'm making a choice to go someplace else. And that's how we get, coincidence, better and better pizza shops. Because in order for another place to exist, they've got to compete with that place. the good place, and then the good place has got to continue to innovate and get better and better, or provide better service in order to stay in business. And so that also applies to the public school system, or the education system in general. And there's a reason why, why do parents want to put their kids in private school? Like, you got to ask yourself that. It's like, if you gave them the choice between private school and public school, why is it your assumption that the public school is going to go out of business or not be funded? Is it because it sucks so bad that everyone would rather be someplace else? If so, then why are we forcing people to be there in the first place?
That's exactly right. It's the exact same thing as, taking the argument for, I don't know, any other tax, I guess, and or any other regulation that is prohibitive for a business, let's say, or let's just take the COVID example, right? Like shutting down businesses, and then the supply chain issues hit, and then saying things like, oh, well, I guess capitalism isn't so good in a crisis, huh? It's like, you're legally shutting down or you're making it illegal to run businesses. What do you mean capitalism failed? It's the exact same thing. It's, taking your money and then saying, oh, how come you can't afford this thing? Because you're taking my money.
Yeah.
So, but to your, to the point you were saying about the interest and the teachers unions, I think you're right on the money, pun intended, because the teachers unions have done everything they can to stop schools from reopening in person, because that would have meant that they would have had to work more. The teachers unions have fought to, at least in Washington state, and I'm sure elsewhere, they fought to have their funding based on the number of empty seats during COVID as well. So even though they are losing students and fewer students need to be served, which was always the argument why they needed more money, was because they're getting more students. So their needs are expanding, so you need more money. And so now when this public schools are losing students because of COVID, because they refused to open, they tried to pass bills that would fund them for the empty seats. They would have been based on population count, not class actual enrolled students. And they're now trying to pass bills that would make it so that the school week is 4.5 days or 4 days. They're constantly trying to do things that are reducing their workload and increasing their funding. And look, I'm not one to say that you can't try innovative school approaches. I'm not one to say that 4 days a week is inherently worse than 5 days, or that students need to be from 8 to 5 or 8 to 2 or 8 to 3, whatever it is. I'm not one to say that. But I just have no faith in the public education system after it says, well, we need to stay closed for so long. Well, we need to fund the public schools based on students that aren't there. And, well, we need more money for this. And it hasn't improved anything every time they've done these things. And now they're saying things like, oh, well, we need to try a new innovative approach that reduces classroom time. It's like, look, maybe less classroom time in a government school is a good thing, but it's not a good thing for the reasons that you think it is. And so I'd say let's increase that. Let's make it the most amount of time out of a government school into a private school or something like that. And let's let the taxpayer dollars follow that, so that, parents aren't on the line to pay for a failing education system from the government and an actual education for their child.
Yeah, it's so funny how, like, things like the public school system or any federal spending, it's the only institution where they can fail and they can be like, well, we failed because we didn't have enough money, we need more. And then you keep giving them more money and they keep failing. It's like, well, maybe we need to put some limits on how much money you make, or at least make it so that, like, your funding is based on performance, maybe, and maybe that will drive behaviors. That's how everything else in life works. Every other business in life works that way. That's just reality, right? Like, if you don't produce things, you're not going to have things eventually, regardless of how much you've saved up. So that's what school choice does. I mean, at any point, I would just be like, the vouchers I prefer for parents to have is their own money. At the end of the day, I would prefer parents have the ability to be like, well, I've got X amount of dollars because I wasn't taxed on it. I'm going to go send my kid to this school, and that school could figure out how to make a profit while also educating students in a really efficient manner. So I know from my standpoint, being homeschooled, there is a school district in my my area that was awesome. I don't know if they can do this anymore, but basically if you signed up to be part of their school district, they would actually give you like something like 80 or 90% of the extra funding they receive from the state. They would give it back to you so you could use it on like educational trips and curriculum and stuff, which was awesome. And so I could get a pretty good education for like $3,000 or $4,000. And it was completely funded through this program. And when the average spending, I think in Washington State at the time was like $8,000 or $9,000 or something like that per student. And so it's way more efficient when the people who are spending the money are also the ones that have as much to gain or to lose from how it's spent.
Yep, exactly right. And I think anyone who has their priorities in the right way, in the right manner, in the right place, would recognize that let's at least let parents try this, because if it doesn't work, then then we can roll it back. There's plenty of temporary provisions that people bake into laws. People act as though legislators have no ability to put a trial window or a timestamp or an expiration in a bill. They totally do, and they have. They do it usually for good things. Like I don't love charter schools compared to like private schools, but I think charter schools are a great step forward in the short term. And Washington State passed charter schools by popular vote, but the measure had a time frame, and legislators let that time frame expire. Jeez. So now no new charter schools can be built. Existing ones can stay in operation, but they restricted the number that could apply and be approved, and they restricted how long that window was for, I think, 10 years or not 10, maybe not 10, maybe more like 8 or something like that. I don't remember, but it expired. They didn't renew it, and it's just like one of those things where, if you want students to succeed, you give options, and then if you feel that by force you need to redo an option, you have that ability as a legislator. Yeah. But of course, politics is oftentimes feels like a zero-sum game where no one wants to cede an inch, because the next person who has the power will override whatever they do permanently and ask for more power so that they can't undo the overriding, and then the next person gets more power to undo the undo, and etc. It's just a race to the bottom.
Yep. Cool. All right. I don't have any more on this unless you do.
No, I think we're good.
All right, friends. Thanks for hanging out with us for this episode. Again, please make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff, and we will catch you on the next one.